Yeah, good evening. I'm very glad that people have shown up. It's a very nice evening out there, and there's certainly lots of other things going on town, I'm sure. So thanks again. I'm, of course, the MLA from Tabacha and Cabinet Minister on this committee.
Thank you for coming. My name is Julie Green. I'm the MLA for Yellowknife Centre.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. Shane Thompson, Nahinde.
Thanks. Once again, my name is Kevin O'Reilly. I'm the MLA for Frame Lake, and I chair the Standing Committee on Rules and Procedures. We have a couple of staff people I'd like to introduce here this evening as well. We have Glenn Rutland, who's the Deputy Clerk, House Procedures and Committees, and we have a researcher with the committee this evening, Mr. Stephen Dunbar. So we're here tonight to hold a public hearing on Bill 56. Which is an act to amend the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act number 2, and also to review the proposed Code of Conduct. So the Standing Committee on Rules and Procedures is a committee of members of the Legislative Assembly, and it includes both regular MLAs and a cabinet member, so we're a bit unusual that way. The bill we are reviewing today has been given first and second reading in the Legislative Assembly and then referred to this committee for review. Legislation is typically brought forward by Cabinet and is reviewed by Standing Committee. In this case, Bill 56 was brought forward by the Board of Management of the Legislative Assembly. This is a board made up of the Speaker, 2 regular MLAs, and 2 members of Cabinet who are responsible for the operation of the Legislative Assembly. The proposed Code of Conduct was prepared by the Office of the Clerk, which is the entity that runs the Assembly. Earlier in this assembly, the members of this committee reviewed the members' conduct guidelines, which are the existing rules for MLAs, and recommended that a new code of conduct be developed, as well as recommended changes to the oath of office. It's our responsibility to consult with residents on what they like or don't like about this bill and the proposed code of conduct, and where necessary, propose changes. We would like to hear your views and comments, which will be used by the committee to identify any changes we would like to see made to the draft legislation, and which we will then report back to our colleagues in the Legislative Assembly. The Standing Committee is holding public hearings on the bill and the Code of Conduct here in Fort Smith. Tomorrow night we'll be in Inuvik, and on Wednesday night in Yellowknife. We will report back to the Legislative Assembly on the proposed legislation and Code of Conduct during the upcoming August sitting. At the back of the room on the table there are copies of the bill, the proposed Code of Conduct, the current members' conduct guidelines, and a briefing note explaining what the proposed bill will do, and a brief summary of the Code of Conduct. So if you don't have copies, I'd encourage you to get them at the back of the room. Thank you. So just before we go to Mr. Rutland, who's going to explain a little bit about what's in the bill, I neglected to introduce Jean Uris with Public Affairs, who's helping us broadcast the hearing here tonight. And yes, it is going to the world via Facebook, and so people can watch it from their homes, wherever they like. So I do want to, though, ask Mr. Rutland to explain a little bit more about what's in the bill and then the proposed Code of Conduct. Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill is slightly unusual in that it is coming forward from the Legislative Assembly itself rather than from the government, and that's because the Legislative Assembly has a separate body, the Board of Management, that addresses the ongoing operation of the Assembly. So there's 3 things that I'm going to touch on. Just how did we get to this point, what the new proposed Code of Conduct says, and then I'll speak briefly to Bill 56, which amends the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act, and that is the act that controls the operations of the Assembly. So first, in terms of how did we get here, the current members' conduct guidelines were adopted in the 12th Assembly of the Legislative Assembly. To give you a sense, we're currently in the 18th Assembly, and each Assembly is 4 years, so it's been more than 20 years since those conduct guidelines. were adopted. As a result, at the start of this assembly, there was a motion passed which asked that the Standing Committee on Rules and Procedures conduct a review of the members' conduct guidelines to see whether or not they were still appropriate and relevant. What came out of that process? The Standing Committee traveled to Hay River, Inuvik, and Yellowknife initially as part of that process, as well as received written submissions. And they presented their final report, which was titled "You Are Standing for Your People," the report on the review of the members' conduct guidelines. The committee made a number of recommendations. The first was to change the oath of office that MLAs take to make it more specific and more substantial. The current oath of office was relatively brief. They looked at ones from other jurisdictions and found one in Newfoundland that spoke to many of the issues that came up in the submissions. They also recommended that the member conduct guidelines be changed to a code of conduct that could be enforced. So the current are just guidelines, and what they were proposing is that a new code of conduct be developed and that there be enforcement provisions for that code of conduct. The committee also suggested that the new code of conduct should provide more specific guidance to members. The current one is more aspirational and very broad, and the committee recommended that it be more specific. Finally, the committee also recommended that the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act be amended to allow the Conflict of Interest Commissioner to investigate complaints, and suggested renaming that position to the Ethics Commissioner. Well, the committee did say the Ethics Commissioner. It's just, I'll speak to the change. Following that, there was work done within the Legislative Assembly as a working group between the Office of the Clerk, representatives from the Department of the Executive, the Conflict and Interest Commissioner himself, as well as the Law Clerk to the Legislative Assembly, to work on a new code of conduct based on the recommendation of committee. So the new proposed code of conduct was tabled in March of this year in the Legislative Assembly, and currently is being reviewed by committee, and they are seeking submissions on it. The statement of commitment, which is the first part of the code of conduct, generally is a broad sort of aspirational statement similar to the contents of the current guidelines. It requires that MLAs hear the voices of all our people, preserve our traditions and bridge them with new ways to build our future, provide legislation, policies, and services for the good of the people as individuals, families, and communities, promote the equality of all our people, distribute resources fairly and justly, and respect and honor our land and all its inhabitants. This is supported by a number of principles that are set out in the code, and these are where we get into more specific obligations for members. This includes that members must act lawfully and must act in a manner that will withstand high public scrutiny. Members must not bring their office as an MLA or the Legislative Assembly itself into disrepute by their conduct. Members have to treat everyone appropriately and not harass people, and this applies both in the workplace and outside. It requires that members should not use their office to obtain a personal or financial benefit. That members should not use the resources of their office for personal gain. That members must make their duties as an MLA their top priority over other offices that they may hold. Members must protect the confidential information they receive from residents, and also that confidential information they may receive from the government. And that these are the guiding principles, but there are other principles or other standards that may be required to protect the public interest and enhance the public confidence. So this doesn't limit the situations that may apply, but it does try to add some specifics for members. To provide some more specific information for members, there is about a 6-page guide to the Code of Conduct. So the Code of Conduct is the first 2 pages, and then there's an explanatory guide. And this is something that is similar to a number of professional associations where they have codes of conduct, and then they have sort of a commentary that goes along with that. So the guide there provides more information. It also provides specific examples of how the code may apply. For example, use of government credit cards, attendance at meetings, different things like that. So it goes into more detail. It also explains that how the code will be enforced. And the enforcement will be the same as to how conflict of interest complaints are currently investigated and enforced. And the code also explains how other legislation may or may not apply to members. So for example, the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act and the Health Information Act don't apply to members of the Legislative Assembly, but the Code of Conduct provides that they will be held to similar obligations in terms of the protection, use, and disclosure of information. It also explains that while the Human Rights Act may not apply to them as a member, they still can't harass or discriminate in their conduct as a member. But in their personal activities that may not be related to a member, for example, if they're a landlord, the Human Rights Act would apply to that context of their life. And it also sets out a range of punishments or explains what the punishments for breaches of the Code of Conduct could include. And that is a number that include a reprimand. The Integrity Commissioner could recommend a fine, that the member pay back restitution or compensation if they've benefited personally, all the way up to declaring that the member's seat is vacant and triggering a by-election. Now, those decisions ultimately the Integrity Commissioner makes a recommendation, and then that goes to the Legislative Assembly. And then the Legislative Assembly can accept or reject that recommendation. So the other recommendation that the committees made was amending the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act. And that is Bill 56, which you have before you. It's called number 2 because there was another act that's already gone through the House, amending other parts of the Legislative Assembly Act. But this one was specifically referred to committee for public review. So this act will bring in the new oath of office that was recommended by the committee, so that the wording that the committee recommended has been adopted. It also includes a new oath of loyalty. So an MLA would be required to swear or affirm the oath of office, swear or affirm their allegiance, which is the oath of allegiance to Her Majesty, and an oath of loyalty. And the oath of loyalty says that the MLA will be loyal to the people of the Northwest Territories as well as respect treaties with Indigenous peoples. The Act also expands the definition of dependent child as it relates to MLAs. This is also for the purpose of conflict of interest provisions, the Code of Conduct, as well as to make the definition consistent with the legislation that sets out the benefits for MLAs. The Act expands the definition of conflict of interest to include something that would further the private interests of a spouse or a dependent child. And it also now says that it's not only is it a conflict of interest to do something that would result in a benefit, but also the failure to do something that would result in a benefit. So if by not doing something you're going to receive a financial benefit and don't disclose that, then that's still a conflict of interest. It expands the prohibition on the GNWT contracting with a member or a corporation that the member has a controlling interest in. The new act or the amendments to the act will provide that the Legislative Assembly can adopt or requires the Legislative Assembly adopt a code of conduct and provides for all the enforcement mechanisms. And then it renames the Conflict of Interest Commissioner as the Integrity Commissioner. And the Integrity Commissioner, he or she would have responsibility for enforcement of both complaints relating to a conflict of interest or to a breach of the code of conduct. And there's a number of transitional provisions just allowing for the current conflict of interest commissioner to continue on. So that is the sort of summary of what the documents are that committee is reviewing.
Great. Thanks very much for that summary. But of course, we're here to hear what you have to say tonight. If you have anything that you would like to share, if you could let Mr. Rutland know or just raise your hand. You can also provide written comments up to July the 17th of this year. And they can be sent by email to Mr. Rutland at glenn_rutland@gov.nt.ca. And there's further information available on the Legislative Assembly website. If you check under committees, rules and procedures, there's information, the same sort of stuff that you have on we have on the back table here, and how to get a hold of Mr. Rutland as well. So one final piece of housekeeping. Please remember that all submissions that you make will be part of the official records or proceedings and may be reflected in our final report. Any submissions made during this meeting may also be televised or broadcast via social media. So we'd like to thank everybody for coming out on this lovely evening.
Can I just say a word before you throw it over?
Sure.
Thanks, Kevin. So what the information doesn't convey is the desire for change that came around when the 18th Assembly was elected. You may recall that 11 of the 19 members were brand new, and a number of long-serving MLAs like your own were defeated. And there was a real push to increase the accountability of MLAs because there was a perception that that area of governance could be improved. It wasn't in response to something that had gone wrong. There were no scandals of that kind in the 17th Assembly, but there was more this whole wave of change that came in the 18th Assembly. And so this work, which had been, as Glenn said, foundering for years, suddenly came alive because of all the new people who were there and them wanting to do this piece of work. So I just wanted to add that because it's not really part of the narrative that we've talked about so far tonight, but that's why now. Now because there were 11 out of 19 new members is the why now. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Julie, for that. Yeah, and I know that Glenn also mentioned the previous report from this standing committee. So this is really trying to close that loop of bringing into effect the new oath of office, a new code of conduct, the oath of loyalty that's been suggested in Bill 56 as well. So this is closing the loop, and the intention is to have these changes made in time for the next election. So, but of course, we'd like to hear what you may have to say about any of these matters, and I'd like to open up the floor to any comments that any of you may have. Thanks. And sorry, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Denise Juhas, and I'm just wondering if I heard right that your new person, the integrity person, would investigate things and then it would go back to the assembly and you could either accept or reject. Is that what I heard?
Yes.
So would you not, why wouldn't you just accept it if this is the person of integrity? I'm trying to understand why there isn't a binding decision. And I guess the other thing is, how come human rights don't apply to, I don't know.
Sure. I'm going to take a crack at the first one, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
And I might ask Glenn to help me with the second one on human rights. But so as I understand it, the commissioner can refer a matter to a sole adjudicator as well if it's serious, and the sole adjudicator can bring forward recommendations. The way that our parliamentary system has evolved, parliaments, legislative assemblies really have authority over themselves, and they set their own rules. You can bet, though, if there's, the report would be made public, so everybody will know what is in the report. And I think there would be some pressure on MLAs to do what's right. And in some cases, it may not be to follow exactly what the recommendation may be, but I think there would be significant public pressure to do that. But that's the way our parliamentary system has evolved, is that Parliament has jurisdiction over itself, which may not always be the best way to do it, but I think in setting out this code of conduct, this is an attempt to try to provide greater detail and codify the rules that do apply to us as MLAs. And now they will be enforceable, so anybody can bring forward a complaint to the Integrity Commissioner if this is agreed to and passes, including members of the public. So I'm going to ask Glenn, though, to add anything else to what I said, and then to deal with the issue around human rights. Thank you.
So Mr. O'Reilly is correct in that the recommendation that comes from the Integrity Commissioner or the sole adjudicator must be tabled in the House by the Speaker, and the House has 15 sitting days to deal with that document. So when the recommendation comes forward, they have 15 days to decide whether they would accept or reject that recommendation. And that's the current model that's been in place for conflict of interests. And it's being applied equally to this one. On the issue of human rights, there's a tradition of parliamentary privilege for MLAs where certain laws that may restrict their ability to do their job or carry out their duties do not apply to them. So part of what the government is bound by the Human Rights Act. It's less clear that the Legislative Assembly or a member, depending upon the context, if it's tied specifically to their duties, may not be bound by the Human Rights Act. But the Legislative Assembly has put in policies in place, for example, for the workplace, where an MLA can't harass or discriminate, and then the code of conduct applies it in a much broader context. So it would apply to any of their activities as an MLA that they couldn't harass or discriminate. So effectively, it gives the same effect as a human rights, but what it does is rather than go through the human rights process, which can take a couple of years to go through the complaint. And the other thing also as well is that the Human Rights Commissioner and the adjudicators for the Human Rights Adjudication Panel are all appointed by the Legislative Assembly, by the members themselves. So the Integrity Commissioner holds office, while he's appointed by the Legislative Assembly, he holds office for a set term. So the Integrity Commissioner will have the option and appoint a sole adjudicator who's not bound to the Legislative Assembly to do the investigation.
Okay, so I understand that, but I'm just wondering, where would there be a time when an MLA or anybody standing up in the House, would it be appropriate for them to step on someone's human rights? I guess that's what I'm asking. Why would there be a privilege around that? Just
The protection, like the freedom of speech. So someone may, there's always a tension in human rights between the balance of, for example, freedom of speech and saying something that may be discriminatory. And that's one of the examples where in the Legislative Assembly itself, the members, any of their comments made are protected. So it's hard to imagine a situation where there wouldn't be some sort of accountability, whether it would be political accountability, whether it be through the code of conduct, where an MLA would make such statements that there wouldn't be consequences. It's just saying these are the avenues where those consequences would be dealt with. It would ultimately be dealt with by the integrity commissioner rather than through the human rights process.
So I don't want to belabor the point, but I think for an example that I can think of, people that are tied to positions, for example, could be in any department, when the political discussion's happening, sometimes they are identified by their position, their reputations, all kinds of stuff is on the table, and it's all under, it's privileged to get up and do that, when some of these people, well, probably all of them, have to be able to move on with their life after they're no longer in public service. So I guess that's I think though anybody has those rights, should have human rights. That's just my...
Yeah, no, thank you for your, the issue. We also do have rules in the Legislative Assembly in terms of what we do say. And it's my understanding, I don't think we're supposed to actually name individuals by name in the House. And if we say something that might be considered inappropriate, another MLA can call us on that, and the Speaker can make a ruling, and the Speaker can suspend somebody or ask them that they withdraw the remarks. There's a whole range of things that the Speaker can do as well. So I think it's fair to say that MLAs are pretty careful about what they do say in the House. We may not always agree with each other, and people out there may not agree with what all the MLAs say, but there are consequences for what you do say in the House. And I don't know, Glenn, do you want to talk a little bit about what kind of authority the Speaker has? Or am I putting you on the spot a little bit? But I think it was a fair question, and because I think there are consequences outside of the Code of Conduct for how MLAs conduct themselves in the House. And I'm just going to ask Glenn to talk a little bit about that as well. Thank you.
Yes, the Speaker, if a member rises on what's called a point of order or a point of privilege, the Speaker will hear from both the person raising the complaint and the person who may have made the comments. And the Speaker will ultimately make a ruling as to whether or not the comment was out of order or a breach of someone's privilege as an MLA. And then there can be consequences for that. The Speaker can actually name the person by name and call them out. They can also recommend, for example, if it's a point of privilege, a motion can be brought forward where the MLA could be censured by the Legislative Assembly, different things like that. The Legislative Assembly always retains the ability to manage its own internal affairs, so the Assembly ultimately can take action to do that. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you didn't go away with the impression that MLAs can say whatever they like in the House. There are consequences. Does anyone else have any comments he'd like to make about? Thank you. If you could, as I mentioned, if you wouldn't mind giving us your name for the record, thank you.
Jessica Cox. I'm with Fort Smith Town Council. I just have a question on, I guess the commentary with the sixth clause in the Code of Conduct. And that is on the last, it's right above number 7. I'm just wondering, it says, if a member is absent for 6 meeting days in a calendar year without a valid explanation, the committee in question is expected to seek the member's removal from the committee. I'm just wondering why 6? And I'm wondering how it was determined that was the right number of missed days.
No, thanks for the question. I think this comes from the rules of the Legislative Assembly. If I remember correctly, I think the reason for 6, I'm not clear, but if you have a suggestion on another number, we're happy to take it. But I think it comes from the rules that we have in place already. But I think the idea by it was to incorporate that into the code of conduct, which is enforceable. The rules are, yes, and so that not just MLAs, but members of the public could complain as well, so. But Glenn's just going to check, I think, what's in the rules on that. And of course, we do want MLAs to be, they're elected to represent their constituents and to be involved in all their duties.
I believe that's in the current attendance policies that were adopted by the Board of Management. It's not specifically in the rules.
So this isn't any different than what's already governing MLAs. Okay, that's actually, that was my only question. I would like to say thank you to the committee for having the materials on the Legislative Assembly website in advance, because it made it easier to be familiar with what you were talking about tonight, which is different than my previous experience with the Post-Secondary Education Act. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed your day in Smith.
Thanks for the compliment. I know I push our staff sometimes to get material up on the website, so much appreciated.
I just have one more quick thing.
Sure.
And that was, on number 6 here, members must give a priority to their duties as a member over all other duties and offices they hold and must dedicate themselves. That number 6 one, I think she was referring to the same thing. Are there a lot of MLAs that hold other offices outside of their duties as a member? Just a question.
I think it would be fair to say that there are some MLAs that do have outside employment in some cases, or positions in other organizations that do require their attention. Yeah, which is different, I think, than I think it's different for cabinet members. Cabinet members actually sort of have to move to Yellowknife and take on different roles and so on, and I might ask Mr. Siebert to talk a little bit about that, but some regular MLAs do have outside employment. Those things are vetted with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner ahead of time, and we have to prepare an annual statement. And parts of that statement are made public as well in terms of if we receive remuneration from outside employment and so on. So there is a vetting process for that work. But I think the intention here is to make sure that the work, once you're elected, your work as an MLA takes priority over everything else. And that's what the new code is about.
So earlier on when the new members came in, there was some stuff in the media. I won't call out the member because he's not here. That would be unethical. Actually, what was alarming was then later the absences are very public. And as we're all working people, and I feel like I really do believe that it's true when you're an MLA, you're working for all of us. And honestly, I felt kind of ripped off when I saw that. So I'm glad that's there, and I would hope that you know, because the committee suffers when people are on it and don't come. That affects everybody's workload, and the constituency does. And if someone's not at work half the time, they shouldn't have to wait for 4 years to address that. So I hope that they are very stringent. There's 101 reasons why someone can't come to work, and a good talker can make them all legitimate, but it's embarrassing.
Yeah, no, thanks for that input. And of course, you know that our attendance reports are tabled, I think, 3 or 4 times a year by the Speaker. They're publicly available on the Legislative Assembly website, so anybody can see those. And if the new code is adopted, any member of the public, if you have issues or concerns, there's an avenue for you to make a complaint, or there will be an avenue for you to make a complaint. Thanks. Julie?
Yeah, thanks. We do have a member who has missed up to 50% of the scheduled meetings and sittings since he was elected. And I'm not clear if the voters in his riding realized that he had another more or less full-time commitment to a national organization. So I appreciate you saying that you feel that we generally, the people of the Northwest Territories, have been shortchanged. But this is one of the things that rests with the voters. And so I don't know if the voters realized that they were going to get a part-time MLA out of it. But I think, you know, with election season coming, it'd be really a good question to find out what other commitments people have to work and community, national, territorial organizations, so that you can gauge how much time you're going to get from that person. Thank you.
Thanks, Lou.
Yeah, things have changed over the years a bit. Of course, when I became a cabinet minister, I was no longer allowed to practice as a lawyer, which is quite fair, of course. That wasn't true in the past for regular MLAs. For example, there was an MLA in the past who was an active lawyer, but I think the public's expectations have gone up quite a bit, and that, yeah, so as I say, it's a bit different for cabinet. I could no longer practice law, which was fine with me. But even if I had been a regular member, I think I would have stopped practicing, because I just don't think you have enough time to carry on 2 full-time professions. Thanks.
Thanks.
Yes, I guess I'm going to be a little bit on the other side of it. You have a life as an MLA, and you have to, it's 24/7, I understand that, but you should be able to still be able to commit to other things that you do. I still engage in stuff that I did when I worked for the government through the youth area, coaching, volunteering. I still do that, but my priority is the job. But you should still be able to have the ability to do things that you enjoy, that help other people, just besides being an MLA. So I don't think this rule is saying no to that. It's just that, you know, our priorities is the job, is for the residents that you're representing and the people in the Northwest Territories at the end of the day. So I'm still involved in everything I used to do before I got elected. It's just that the priority is constituency and then committee work and what you have to do at the Legislative Assembly. So I think I wanted to make that clear, that I don't think that's stopping. This is stopping it. It's just that you just have to make a choice. And again, it's your choice of how you move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for responding to that. I appreciate it. I guess in a way,
We're just going to get you the microphone again. Thanks.
thank you. I appreciate for you all responding to that. And I just think in a way that it's really sad in this day and age, the kind of work that has to be done for the people of the Northwest Territories and any government that's running, that you have to spell it out. This is your job. This is your priority, you know, but I guess if you have to, there it is, and hopefully everybody will do as Ms. Green says and put it to the people. Like, either you're in or you're out. Or it's half-time, I don't know. Thank you.
Well, yes, I'm a lowly regular MLA, and I can tell you, you can make as much of this job as you want. You can work 24 hours a day and still never get everything done. So it does involve trying to determine what the right balance is for you personally, but you know, also in the interest of your constituents and your mental health and so on. So it's not an easy job, but I think this will help clarify that those other outside activities, your job as an MLA really takes priority over everything else. Thanks. But thanks for the feedback as well. Any other comments, questions? Mayor? And thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for all for coming here this evening. I just have a question about the number 2. So members shall ensure their conduct does not bring the integrity of their office or of the Legislative Assembly into disrepute. And mostly just not that section, but the section explaining it. And it talks about the personal affairs of members and like violation of certain laws. So what do you use to kind of benchmark what is and is not appropriate behavior on a personal level?
Well, I think it's, if you've been convicted of a criminal offense, you automatically lose your seat as an MLA. I think that's the standard. I think what this does, though, is spell out, sorry, if you're incarcerated, I meant to say that, thank you. But I think what this tries to do is explain what might be a more gray area. And obviously, there's going to be some element of judgment involved in this. And that's where, the advice of the Integrity Commissioner, part of their job is to, and part of our job as MLAs is if we're not clear on something, we can go and ask the Integrity Commissioner, or right now it's the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, for advice if we're not clear, not sure of something. So that sort of service is available to us now. And with once the code is approved, if we're not clear on or not sure of something, we will have the ability to go and ask the Integrity Commissioner about these matters. But this does start to stray over into a member's personal life to some extent. And I think that the clear thing is that MLAs should not be doing things that bring the institution into or challenge the integrity of the institution, people's confidence in their work as an MLA. I think that's what this section is trying to do.
Right, and it was their personal life basically that I was kind of more focused on. Is like, how do you determine what in somebody's personal life, like, where is the level of judgment on what a person does in their personal life to how that affects them as an MLA?
Yeah, well, my colleague here has pointed out that the last paragraph does provide a little bit of guidance around this. The last paragraph in number 2, where, violation of certain laws, such as those involving a breach of trust or abuse of a position of trust, authority, or intimacy, will be considered to be particularly damaging to the integrity and honor of the Legislative Assembly. So I think that's starting to draw a fairly clear line in the sand.
So just to be clear, on that last paragraph, you have, so violation of certain laws, such as those involving a breach of trust. Is it the laws involving a breach of trust and the laws involving an abuse of a position of trust, authority, or intimacy?
Yes, that's what the guideline says. And
okay, sorry, I
Sure.
just wasn't sure if it was like a law, violation of a law of abuse of position of trust, authority.
do you want to take? I might turn this over to my colleague.
Yeah, the paragraph deals with specifically with violation of certain laws, so that's what we're talking about in that paragraph, and it identifies, I think, ones that are regarded as particularly serious, like a breach of trust, authority or intimacy. So in that section, we're talking about laws. Now, above that, there are other things that are not necessarily a breach of a law. It's more a breach of standard of conduct that we're expecting.
Right.
So, but that final paragraph does talk about violation of certain laws.
Okay. I was just thinking that there, I mean, you can have an abuse of authority without breaking a law. So, right, is that still covered under, or is breaking the law where your limit is?
I'm going to ask Glenn to help. Thanks.
This section, like the commentary, is just meant to help. It won't restrict. So ultimately, the principle itself is that members must act lawfully and in a manner that will stand the closest public scrutiny, upholding the integrity and honor of the Legislative Assembly. So something may be lawful, but it still may not meet that test of public scrutiny. So that would be captured in here. This paragraph is just to give an example. So examples of breach of trust could be like fraud, if someone was convicted of fraud or something like that. And the things like position of trust, authority, or intimacy, those tend to be, there are some laws that deal specifically with that, but those are also sometimes considered aggravating factors, for sentencing or something like that, where someone will say, well, this was, you were in a position of authority and sort of that. So that's where some of that language comes from, but the actual principle itself is broader, both lawfully and in a manner that would withstand. So I would say it would capture some of that, like if there was conduct. Ultimately, a lot of this will be determined by members of the public who bring forward a complaint. If there was an abuse of authority that maybe was not, wouldn't be classified as lawful, but an MLA abused their position to obtain certain benefits or something like that.
Right.
That may be an example, and that would be determined as some of these examples come forward. The Integrity Commissioner, their decisions will help inform some of this, but this is just designed to address the committee's concern that the last guidelines didn't provide enough detail or sort of information for people to understand what's actually caught.
So do you see it as being similar to the GNWT's harassment policy, where it specifies abuse of authority, harassment, sexual harassment, and I don't recall the fourth one offhand, but those kind of similar situations, not necessarily, I guess not necessarily law breaking behavior, but certainly behavior that's unbecoming.
Thanks, Lynn. We reviewed the harassment policy in 2017, and we found that it was good and it could be improved. The major way to improve it was to direct complaints to the Integrity Commissioner instead of to the clerk's office, so that it would be outside of the Legislative Assembly altogether. But the grounds for alleging harassment are very broad. It can be any kind of harassment, and we also broadened the class of people who can complain of harassment, not only colleagues and people who work for us and with us, but also constituents and members of the public. So it's I think now a little broader than the GNWT harassment, and again, it's to speak to that idea that we have to be able to bear the closest scrutiny of our actions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, as Glenn has pointed out, the section that we were talking about, the last one in under paragraph 2, does speak about violation of certain laws, but it doesn't have to be a violation of a law to bring this section into not into force, but for this section to be effective. So you don't have to be breaking the law for this to apply. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Lua. The other thing, of course, is that this doesn't just apply to an MLA in their official capacity, but it also applies in their personal life. So things that an MLA does in their personal life, if they, create concerns around their ability or their public confidence, that they could form the basis for a complaint for breach of the code of conduct for things in their personal life.
An example of that is somebody who has addictions and, that's playing out publicly, and it may be bringing the the person into disrepute, but also the Legislative Assembly into disrepute. But as things stand now, there's no recourse to that. Yeah, I mean, you can go and have a conversation with the person and ask for a change, but now there is, it's tightened up quite a bit, to give that as an example. And there is some language around intoxication that deals with alcohol and drugs, and so there is an acknowledgement that we are fallible like the rest of the population of the NWT. We have a number of people with addictions, and so we have to put some guidelines around their behavior. Thank you.
I think Len would like the microphone again. Thanks.
Thank you. So, speaking to drug or alcohol addictions, are there any provisions to have a member receive treatment if those are identified as issues? Yes? Okay.
The members are eligible for the same kind of benefits that the GNWT workforce has with the Employee and Family Assistance Program. So somebody who wanted that kind of help would be eligible to receive it, no questions asked.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking the question, so it's very helpful. Any other questions or comments on any of the materials? No? Okay. If there are no further comments or presentations from the public, do members agree that this agenda item is concluded? Great. So thank you. And on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank everybody who joined us this evening. As MLAs, of course, it's always a privilege to be here, especially for those of us from Yellowknife, to come out and visit other communities and to hear from you directly. When we make our report in the upcoming sitting of the Legislative Assembly, we will highlight the feedback we received during these meetings and from other public submissions. If you still have any questions about the bills or want to make a written submission, please talk to the committee clerk, Mr. Rutland, and you can also visit our website. And so I will now adjourn this public meeting. Thank you.
There's another public meeting coming up on Monday, though. I mean, we'll advertise it for lands.
Thank
Not
you.
on that
Yes,
committee,
yeah.
but No,
That's good.
that is an important one.
Yeah.
And,
Yes, I'll be back next week.
Yeah.
It's Bill 46.